Hi, Jan. It's great to be with you here online, and thanks very much, Welcome, for agreeing to be with us.
Thank you so much, Tim, for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to do anything together with you.
So we're going to get into a bit of conversation about art, I hope, and the art you produce and what motivates you with that. But before then, can you remember the first painting or the first piece of art that you felt viscerally moved by?
I can, yes. It was the Pietà in St. Peter's, and it really kind of blew me away because I just couldn't believe that it was stone, that it was made of marble. It felt like, it was flesh, and it was it was two bodies there in front of me instead of someone having carved this out of a block of marble. It was just a real shock to see it in person.
You're employed by Hewlett-Packard as a senior color scientist, aren't you? Do you know how to explain what it means to be a color scientist? What it is your work entails?
I can try, and then you can tell me whether it worked, Tim. So my work is about color, as the title suggests, and this is something that's quite important for products like printers. And what I therefore end up doing is making sure that the various technologies and materials that we use in our printers result in prints that have colors that people like and are happy to pay for.
So that was always a bridge that I understood with you, that connected your art and the science of your work. Is it possible to ask you to explain a little bit about how you craft, how you produce your work, and what your methodologies are?
Mm-hmm. So when I first started painting, it was in my teens, and I would do oil and acrylics. And then for a long time, for various reasons, I have not been able to continue with that. And when I returned to it, it was at a time when my sons were very young. My youngest son, Thomas, he was, I think, 2 years old when I kind of picked this up again. And the idea of setting up a canvas and doing anything of the sort was just completely alien and incompatible with having small children. At least it seemed something almost impossible to me at the time. And this is what then led me to kind of try and create new works using an iPad and a stylus to then make marks on this kind of digital surface that the iPad creates.
So because of the tools that you're using to create your art, there's a sort of a commonality in a stylistic approach.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find yourself limited by that? Do you think of yourself as a digital artist?
I would say no and no. I don't find myself limited by it because for me the key is to think about it as another way of creating something. You could argue that, or you could ask the question of whether earlier forms of creating art are superior to later ones, or whether they are more or less limiting. But I'm not sure whether that's really the most important angle. I think the question is more, what does a particular way of creating something let you do, and how do you then express yourself within the possibilities that it presents? Therefore, also, I would not consider myself a digital artist, since it's really accidental that I happen to use an iPad and particular software on that iPad to create something. It's like asking a photographer what camera they use. The great majority of them would be offended by a question like that. I mean, I'm not offended by your question, Tim, but it's really, I don't know. I've never thought much about the technique and the tools. It's more about the content itself.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that content. I think all the content I've seen, it seems to be speaking personally. It's not simply representational. You seem to be trying to express something, not a thing, but it always seems to be speaking of you, seems to capture something of you, not simply a subject, but the choice of subject seems so often to speak of you, your motivation. Is it possible to talk about that creative spark, that thing that makes you want to sit down, that captures the drive to produce something?
Yeah, in fact, I thought about this before. You asked me, or you suggested this interview, Tim, and it's a really difficult question because for me the overriding sense is that it's something I just have to do, and that it's something that I would just do, regardless of whether the end result is something that anyone else, would find anything in. And really, fundamentally, it's creating an image for me is a way to reflect on and to engage with what's happening in my life and around me. And it's also a way to do that maybe sidesteps some of the challenges of doing that in terms of language, where maybe the use of certain words already frames how you think about certain topics. And I just often have the sense that creating something visual maybe doesn't impose those constraints. Maybe it does so others, but it gives you more freedom in a certain sense of just engaging with a certain situation or topic and creating something in response to it.
Your faith is reflected a lot in the art you produce. Is it always core to what you're trying to express or what you're trying to represent in your art?
Mm-hmm. Yes, very much so. In a sense, painting for me is a form of prayer, first and foremost. And this can be prayer in contemplating some passage of scripture, or it can be prayer in asking for clarity or praying for the good of others in difficult situations that often surround us. So the starting point very much is that also the process of mark making that is the basis of creating a painting sets a framework within which to have a conversation with God, and a conversation not in words, but a conversation in some other form. So that is very much always the starting point for creating a new piece for me. And then a central theme of the paintings that I've created over the last years is always the human person. And it's always a concern for the human person and the desire to understand the human person more intimately and more fully. And also in a way where maybe my own religious faith is an impetus and a context for it, but also very much a desire for universality, a desire to make this process open to everyone else. And it's really the second element that makes me share these paintings that I create, because I make them for myself, but then because I believe that they connect to something that is accessible to everyone and that is shared by everyone. I've sort of had to get over myself to share them.
One of the recent portraits you created of George Floyd. Why did you make that drawing?
Yeah, I made it because I watched the video of his murder, and I found it deeply disturbing and deeply hurtful and deeply painful to think that an event like this can take place at any point in history, and even more so today. And I also felt like it's one in a string of many tragedies and atrocities of this kind, and I wanted to not let this one pass me by, and I wanted to, in a sense, get to know George Floyd better, even though I never met him in person. Obviously, I felt like this suffering that was perpetrated on him and on his family and on many others was one that I needed to be close to. And I felt like creating a painting of his portrait would be a way to make him more real to myself. And in the process of doing that, I felt like I need to write his name, almost as a sort of punishment, like when you have a phrase that you have to write 100 times. But more than that, maybe the initial idea was that it turned out to be something that would make his name just be etched in my memory. If you see that painting, you'll see that the background is a repetition of his name. The background that has these white lines is actually his name all around the painting of his head. And I felt like it was a way for me to feel close to him.
How do you want people to view your art? Do you want them to view it electronically or physically?
Yes, I do want them to view it. You know, at first I didn't really, care too much about that. I made these pieces for myself, and I continue to do that still today. But I've then discovered that they become parts of conversations. You know, that if I share what I create, even electronically, then at times people come back to me and say, "Oh, I've seen this painting you've made, and it made me think of." And then they say something that has nothing to do whatsoever, with my state of mind as I created a piece of art. And to me, it's this thing that is the most important about it, is that I think art becomes a token, but a token that no longer just carries what the creator has wanted to represent, but it's a token that can connect to other realities in those who view them. And it allows for a rich relationship between the person who created the piece of art and the person who's viewed it.
Have you had a particular experience where you feel changed through the process of creating a piece?
Yes, I would say so. And I think what changes is my relationship to the subject of a painting. Because creating a painting requires to engage with the subject, whatever it may be, in a different way. It requires you to sort of get under the skin of the subject and to become part of what it is that you then create a painting of. So it's certainly, is transformative as far as I'm concerned in how I relate to certain subjects. For example, one kind of topic more on the very kind of clearly religious is an understanding of Jesus' crucifixion. I've painted many paintings that involve the crucified Jesus, and to relate to him in that moment of his kind of earthly presence means that to paint him in that form meant that I wanted to understand, and I had to understand much more about what that meant. And I felt that it was also a way for me to understand the suffering and the pain that he must have undergone in that moment. And that certainly, has had a big impact on me. And it's also a topic that keeps kind of drawing me to itself, and I keep revisiting it. And every time I discover, some other aspect of that moment in time that I had not been so clearly aware of before. Then also this point that you made, Tim, about the separation of the process and the product. I believe very much in that, maybe to the point of kind of annoyance for some of my friends who will ask me, why I made a certain painting, or what I meant to, what I meant to say with a certain painting. And at that point, I really, don't feel in a position to start interpreting the product of the process that I underwent. The product is there and it stands on its own feet. I may, look at it just like any other viewer, but I'm not the source of an authoritative interpretation of it.
I want to return to this this idea of yours that you don't see yourself as a digital artist. It's not a definition. Mm-hmm. You're an artist who produces, and the medium is not the driving factor.
Then I also recognize that by creating these paintings in a certain way, that way of creating them conditions them and gives them certain kind of possibilities and certain sets limits and also enables certain ways of working. I also see that at the same time, I would not think of Michelangelo as a marble sculptor, as opposed to earlier sandstone sculptors, no? Or I wouldn't think of Caravaggio as an oil painter, as opposed to Hockney as an acrylic painter. No? I'm being a bit facetious, but it's true that all of these artists have used certain, forms of expression, certain tools to do so, and it's undeniably part of what they create. But I just think that the more important lines are drawn elsewhere. So, for example, Caravaggio, to my mind, he's all about the beauty of ugly realities. If you think about, I don't know, Anthony Gormley, he's all about the human body from outside and from inside. I think it's these things that I believe that these artists would also have been engaged with had they used other means. They happen to have used certain means, true, but I'm not sure whether that's the most important factor.
I want to talk now, just to branch off, I want to talk about your study of philosophy.
The reason for it is very much that during my studies, I've made many friends whose worldviews were just completely different from mine. And I've greatly enjoyed discovering, what it is like to be an agnostic, or what it's like to be a communist or an atheist. And I found it phenomenally enriching, to understand how someone else who lives in the same world can read it and interpret it in such different ways. And I felt like I wanted to have better tools and better skills for understanding exactly what it is like, for them to live in this world. And it's here that philosophy was the way to kind of have richer and deeper conversations with my friends. Both the motivation for studying philosophy and what is a strong part of why I paint is the desire to be open to everyone. I think this is really at the heart of both of these aspects of my life. On the side of painting, it's about expressing my experience of the world in a way that may be more accessible than spoken language or written language. While on the side of philosophy, it's sort of a complement to that, which is to be able to understand others more deeply, and also being able to share more deeply about what it is like for me to be in this world.
It's so against your nature to take a selfish view, but I'm trying to find what gives you the greatest, what do you imagine giving you the greatest satisfaction?
Undoubtedly spending time with friends, and conversation with friends. Really, that's the most important thing for me. And many things that I've done that I do, if they lead to that and to broadening my circle of friends, whenever someone else becomes a friend of mine, it's just the most amazing thing, because a whole new world kind of opens up, and you effectively get to relive and rediscover your own life through the eyes of someone else. But what I find even more of a gift, really, or more of a an unexpected kind of gift in return for this process of creating art, is when this appreciation comes from someone unexpected. So I have many friends who hold very different views from my own. In fact, some who are kind of actively campaigning against the Catholic Church, in their own countries. And yet, occasionally, they will like one of my paintings that very clearly is a depiction of Jesus in some context, for example. And then they may even, then drop me a line kind of privately, thanking me for the painting that I created. And it makes me, think that that visual art, such as painting or sculpture, has this potential to connect people where maybe in other terms it would not be possible to do so. Maybe if we spoke to each other, we would just be sharing views that are entirely distinct and incompatible. Yet there is something about, that can be something about a piece of art that can be appreciated even if you share nothing else.
I'm sure that the more you enriched your life in relationship,
mm-hmm.
the more art we'd see from Jan Morovic.
For sure.
Jan, this has been a joy. Thank you very much for finding this time to spend with us.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe in these times, and I can't wait till we can be in each other's physical presence again. And thank you for all you do and all you give.
Thank you so much, Tim. It was a real joy.
Thanks very much.